My name is Duncan. This is Valentine. We're from the Center for Applied Rationality. Thank you guys for inviting us down to give a talk. Basically what we're going to do tonight, we have just like the tiniest sprinklings of a couple of techniques that we teach in our 4-day workshop. It should be woefully insufficient. Hopefully we will leave you interested and curious, and you'll want to email us with questions and comments and snide remarks and carry on the conversation. But also hopefully what we give you tonight will be something that you guys can use and apply. It'll be practical and interesting. Yeah, so I'm going to jump right in. There are 3 sort of images, metaphors that I'd like you to be able to hold in your head over this next hour. It'd be great if you could hold all 3 of them simultaneously, but I have to speak one at a time. So I'm just going to give you 3 pictures that aren't exactly connected and don't exactly make sense. Hopefully they will connect and make sense over the course of the hour. So the first is the image of a pair of Jehovah's Witnesses coming up to a front door. I believe there's usually a book involved. And my impression is that probably everyone in this room, so there's something about what's going on in the Jehovah's Witness situation that gives us pause and makes us hesitate. But there is at least one aspect in which what a Jehovah's Witness is doing is actually trying. We may question their specific goal, but given the generous interpretation their specific goal is correct, these are people that think that they have the answer, and their response is a sort of Hufflepuffy, dedicated, all right, well this is the answer, so what we're going to do is we're going to go out and we're going to knock on every single door, and we're going to, they're trying very, very hard. And so this is good. At least that aspect of this situation is very, very good. Something that effective altruists can definitely respect. The next picture I'd like to give you is of a scientist in her lab. She's got her little beaker, maybe has a computer, entering data. And this person is spending perhaps hours and hours and days and weeks, perhaps running the same experiment over and over and over again. It's not particularly sexy, it's not particularly interesting. They're just crunching lots of numbers, lots of statistical tools. And at the end of this whole process, if this is all the knowledge that is possible in the universe, they will have maybe locked down that much of it. But there's a sense in which this person is looking for the truth. And they're looking for the truth neutrally, they're looking for the truth sort of avidly. All that they're after is getting the correct answer. And I think there's something there that we can respect and admire and are very interested in. And the third thing that I would like you guys to hold in your head is something that we at CFAR are tentatively calling the good faith principle, which is one of those things that it's very easy to get a room of people to nod their heads at, and very hard to get a room of people to actually embrace. The good faith principle states that you simply, absent other information, you always assume that the agents involved in a given situation are acting in good faith. Most people are mostly good. Most people are trying to do the right thing. We're saying that you want to always assume that people believe what they're saying, are trying to make the world a better place. This also works internally, that in your own psyche, the part of you that is screaming that you should burn down your ex's garage is wrong, but it's trying to do something positive for you. It's trying to draw your attention towards something important, trying to protect you from something, trying to make you aware of something about the world. The good faith principle. This one's hard to really get inside your soul, so I have a little example that I think explains why you should always adopt it. I have a bag here. Anyone care to guess what is in the bag?
Skittles.
How confident are you?
Reasonably confident.
There are in fact Skittles in this bag. They're all yellow and purple because I ate all the rest. Only yellow and purple is left. 70% of the Skittles in this bag are purple, 70% of the Skittles in this bag are yellow.
30.
Sorry, 30%. 70-30. See? So as I'm laying these out, hopefully you guys can see, it was like distressing to come into this room and notice there was no great place to lay out Skittles, but I assume that this is like actually a fairly rare need for a classroom. There we go. 10 Skittles. And this is fairly representative. We're like not surprised. There are 4 yellow instead of 3. It wasn't like perfect. This is entirely believable as a result, right? So 70-30 split, 4 and 6. If I were to ask a room full of people to predict the next 10 Skittles to come out of the bag, we're going to skip the part where we actually get you to write it down. But there's an interesting thing that happens where, first of all, like in your own head, make your prediction, the next 10, in order, right? Like P stand for purple, Y stand for yellow. What do you expect the next string of Skittles to be? So there's this interesting thing that happens where people tend to guess something like that. Understandable? Does anybody have the reason why it's wrong? Yeah.
Well, you don't know which Skittles are going to be yellows, so the best you can do is just guess for any one Skittle, and for any one Skittle, there's a better chance it's going to be purple.
Yes, exactly. If I were to like narrow it down to a single Skittle, you know that the bag is a 70-30 split. What's like you're going to win $1 if you're right, and you're going to lose $1 if you're wrong. What color do you guess?
Purple.
Purple, right? And then I love purple. You guys win $1. What color do you guess next?
Purple.
Purple. Yep. And like no matter what, you always want to guess purple. This is the key, right? There's a part of us that really doesn't like to. There's a part of us that really likes this, and it doesn't want to say, right? Even as I'm just writing this on the board, there's like a certain part of my soul that is screaming, like, no, no. And it's because I know that if I guess this, I'm going to be wrong. I like know that I'm going to be wrong. There are going to be these ones that come up yellow, and like every time I guess purple and it comes up yellow, I feel like I'm taking a hit. We have a very strong instinct to like sprinkle the yellows in to make it look like the real answer. But in fact, each individual time that we guess yellow, we have a 30% chance of being right instead of a 70% chance of being right. And we're just like, on average, screwing ourselves over. Does that make sense to everybody? Any like confusions on that?
Well, have you run this experiment before? Like,
yeah.
Because one
But
question that I had was like, if you don't say what the target function is, like, if it's how many you get right, or not
right.
many, even how many you get right is still the shitty piece. But like, if it's how many p's total versus y's total, like,
yeah,
that could probably confuse people.
Yeah, and like in the longer version, we do make that a lot clearer, right? If you're just guessing number and not specific order, then you obviously want to throw in your 30% of yellows. But when we're looking at like an individual case, right? Like when we're guessing for the first one, we go with our majority. And this, in my head, is a fairly compelling explanation of why the good faith principle is the right move. Because if you adopt the good faith principle, if you always assume that the people on the other side of the argument are acting in good faith, you will in fact be wrong some of the time, right? But you are minimizing your wrongness. And most importantly, you're minimizing your wrongness on the side of being open-minded, listening, mining the opposition for as much data and information about the world as you can get. And I posit that this is the thing you really want to do. You want as much information as you can possibly get. The better your map of reality, the better you understand reality, the more things you can see, the more you know which things in the universe are levers and which things are switches and how to pull them to accomplish your goals. So, good faith principle. Next time you think that someone is obviously yellow, go ahead and assume that they are purple. You might be wrong. but you'll be like erring on the side of your own statistical benefit. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Val.
Cool. So, going to, right, I'll be
Yeah, you can knock
here.
the Skittles down now.
I see. I will set our example here. Right, so I'm going to look at an application of this kind of thinking. It's not, we'll have to kind of work out through why it's an application. Let me kind of paint the picture for you about the sort of puzzle we're staring at. Okay. Right. So there's a curious puzzle having to do with the way in which our motivation system is linked up. Like there are ways in which we'll sometimes have an idea of what's important, and we'll have a sense of what we are compelled to do, and these two don't always match up very well. So I want to zoom in on a couple of cases of this to sort of examine part of what's going on, or what might be going on, and what we might be able to do about that. So our executive director, Anna Salomon, would sometimes get some sort of check in the mail, like something that says it's worth like $90. And then for the sake of our example, we'll say that for whatever reason, like this is typically after 90 days, for the sake of symmetry, we'll say that after 30 days, it expires, which is a bad thing, but this is a good thing, right? Having the check there. So this situation for her would generate a strong impulse to deposit the check, right? Not terribly complicated. Compare this to a situation in which she receives a $50 parking ticket. The $50 parking ticket has the lovely property that after 30 days, it accrues a $90 penalty, and then we'll owe $140. And this can actually keep going and do all kinds of bad stuff, but we'll ignore this part of the branch. And like this is bad, and this is also bad, so this somehow causes an inclination not to deal with it. Okay. There's a very curious symmetry here where the question is, once you're holding the paper, okay, the situations are perfectly symmetric. Right? It's a question of, do you want to be $90 ahead come 30 days later? And if you do, you take action, and if you don't take action. Right? But somehow somehow checks are always delivered in intrinsically more delightful to hold and delightful to deposit paper. Right? No, that's obviously not what's going on. There's some kind of quirk going on here having to do with the nature of perception. So there's a funny thing that can happen in this situation where if you take this and you visualize this, and let me adjust that. So if instead of, like if you're sitting here looking at this, and you can think of it as a $90 check that expires in 30 days. Like you're actually looking at it and can go, oh wow, okay, I've already lost $50, that's the past. Okay, now I have $50 gone, it just hasn't left my bank account yet, whatever. But I have an opportunity to deposit $90. This doesn't work for everyone, but for Anna it does. And this does an interesting mental reframe where the thing that is causing the aversion, once you take this fact and you embed it in how the situation is being perceived, it can create an emotional shift. Right, there's a couple of interesting properties about this. One is that our actions, what we are inclined to do, can shift and even completely flip depending on how we are choosing to perceive the situation. The second is that this is not just a motivation hack. Right? It's important that this is correctly importing facts about the world. It is being true to what is real. Right? So we're trying to respect both of these. It's not just like viewing this like a bomb that's going to explode if we don't like go and panic. Like it's not an arbitrary thing. It's actually encoding real information about the world in a way that is emotionally accessible so that our motivation and our sense of what is right to do are linked up. Okay. So how much sense do you feel like this example makes? I know I haven't said of what, but like, how much sense does the example make from none at all to totally get this? Okay, cool.
Can I add one small bit?
Yeah.
In particular, there's like, Val already said this, but I want to underline. There's a sense of like, when you're looking at the check, you like want to open it. And when you're holding the check, you like want to put it in your wallet. And you like notice an ATM and you like want to pull over and deposit it. And it's like an effortless thing. You don't have to like make yourself, because like this is money going into my bank account. Whereas like with the parking ticket, you like kind of want to like leave it on the like kitchen table and like maybe put other things on top of it, because every time you look at it, it's like punching yourself. Right? But this reframe, like, oh, I've already lost $140, but like now I have the $90 check. It actually makes it delicious to like open up the envelope and like put it in your wallet and like take all those other steps without having to make yourself do them.
I agree. Okay, so this is one kind of example. I want to give another one. It'll be a copy of the same structure. So there's a common example that gets used when we're trying to express this technique, where it's an attempt for me to describe attempts to do push-ups, because I wanted to get some exercise between doing work on my dissertation. I mean, this isn't quite an accurate drawing, it was more something... Right, so, so there's an interesting thing here where there are lots of reasons for me to want to do exercise, and for the sake of completeness, I'm doing this as push-ups. There's a program, 100pushups.com, and I'll just walk you through specific steps. Seems great. So I looked at this and I went, okay, that's a cheap way of getting exercise, doing like small breaks, etc. So everything seems good. But I kept noticing myself practicing thinking about it. So there's an interesting question. What's going on here? So after I examined it, I had to like stop and think for a minute. Okay, for some reason, I'm not doing these push-ups. So let me first note, okay, whatever's going on, well, there's got to be some reason for this behavior. Like I assume that this is not just cosmic rays whacking my brain in some sort of coincidental way. That, like, no, there's going to be some sort of generative principle, some sort of thing that is keeping me from wanting to do the push-ups. So I tried imagining it, walking through it in my mind about what exactly was unpleasant. I tried doing some push-ups, not to try to force myself to engage in the program, but to examine in a mindful way what exactly is bleh about it, what is keeping me from engaging with it. And I noticed that there were a couple of things that had to do with the physical experience of it that I thought were particularly aversive. I didn't like getting sweaty. I didn't like panting. Like the fact that I would be breathing so hard that sometimes I would wonder if I was just going to die. There's also like this burning sensation in the muscles. And like all of this is like very unpleasant stuff, right? There's probably like, there's a couple of others of these too, right? So I'm looking at this going, well, you know, like that's unpleasant. I can sort of see why a part of me wants nothing to do with this. This is going to play the role of the parking ticket. So the thing is that there is a reason why this seems like a good idea to me. So if I can see some sort of link as to why this is connected to the reason why it's a good idea, then I will have done the same kind of mental reframe. So the process by which I do this is I notice, okay, well, what's going on with the sweating? Well, the sweatiness is like my body going through cooling, trying to make it so that it can be more temperature efficient as it's going through this process. The temperature efficiency work is one of the benefits of exercise. Panting is like part of the cardiovascular system. Right? It's putting stress on the ability to distribute oxygen efficiently through the body, creating a stimulus for me to become more efficient at that. Same thing with the burning. The burning sensation is a feeling in my muscles of them having impetus to become stronger. In other words, these are the experiences that let me know that the whole reason why I'm doing the push-ups is in fact occurring. Like I'm making progress. So noticing this, I can map this over to a feeling like this is why I'm doing it. So this is the same kind of reframe that's trying to note facts about the world and port them into why it is that it is a good thing for my goals. Facts about the world, trying to give a true conversion into why it's related to my goals. Okay. So the whole point is to try to structure this in a way that lets me see not just that I'm trying to motivate myself. This is not trying to force my will. Right? I'm not just trying to make myself go, right? So, right, so this seems to be not as helpful, like we can run out of willpower trying to force ourselves. Sometimes the way I think of this is as though we have the models in our minds that can kind of move our thoughts and move our perspectives about the way the world works. And then we have sort of the machinery in our hearts, the thing that sort of moves our motivation, our drive, our passion. You don't want your models to argue with the thing that is in control of the pistons. Right? Otherwise, like you're going to have, then you have to use willpower to reach down and make the gears move differently. So instead, this is a matter of dialoguing. Said differently, taking this seriously is an example of good faith principle in action. I'm assuming that there is something valuable going on here. Right? And so I'm trying to dialogue saying, oh, okay, this sort of drive center, the thing that is connected with why I'm doing what I'm doing, I'm going to assume that it has a perspective that may have information in it, it may have value, it may also just be missing information. So I will assume that if I dialogue with it, if I convey to it what the point is, that it will update correctly, that it will shift its model correctly so that I can get these two systems to link up, such that either I find myself drawn to do push-ups, which is what actually ended up happening here, or I find myself satisfied that I cease to care. Right? Either is a success condition. Right? But there's this important step where I have to step back. Even before I've gone through this conversion process, I step back and say, I don't know what the right answer is. But I know that if I dedicate myself to truth, if I dedicate myself to a good process and I have good faith in what I am doing, then whatever result I end up in, where I am doing push-ups because it's easy or I'm not doing push-ups because I cease to care, either one is a good world to end in as long as I'm doing a good process. So I have to be okay with both worlds. So, sort of trying to draw something that's meant to hint at a generalization here. How much sense is this making to you? Excellent. One other quick example to show the symmetry of this. There's this funny thing where lots of people will spend a lot of time on Facebook, right, and be kind of frustrated with themselves about spending so much time on Facebook, but like there they are going through. You can like put whatever you like on their Reddit or whatever, I don't care. But like there's some kind of draw there where they feel sort of like, well, I spend a lot of time doing this thing that's a useless activity. I'm going to think for a moment, just predict what kind of process I'm about to walk you through. Think on your own for a few moments. Okay, so the first is that I'm noticing this conflict, this sort of fricativeness. Okay. And I assume that there is, so I'm conscious of one part, which is this, I'm conscious of a bunch of the parts, but I'm conscious of the part that says, this is a stupid activity. This is pointless. I shouldn't be doing this. And yet I do. Right? So I'm going to assume that both of these have good value, that both of these have insight into the way the world actually works, and I want to respect both of them. That's a good faith principle. But in order to have good drive aligned, so that what I think is right and what I do are aligned, these two have to talk. These two have to link up well. So I notice this situation, and I think in this case it's going to be the flip. Rather than looking at the things that keep me from doing the thing that I want to do, that I think is right to do, I'm going to assume that there is something good about this, like some sort of draw, and ask what is good about it. So you get the goods of things like a feeling of connection with friends. I notice that there's also this yummy feeling that comes from scrolling down. Like if I scroll a little farther, then I've read one more article and it feels sort of like clink, yes, cool, clink, yes, cool, like whatever that feeling is for you. There might be a couple of others like this. These can hint at something that is important. Like each one of these may be plugging into something important, but let me give you one example of where this might go. That yummy feeling, that feeling of satisfaction or just a little farther, or ooh, I'm almost caught up. Fun fact, Facebook hires teams of psychologists to research how to give you that specific addictive feeling so that you stay on Facebook. So one thing you can do is imagine that this is sort of like people holding some sort of like scalpel to your head, and they're sort of like digging in, kind of screwing with your motivation system. That feeling is the feeling of your motivation system being hacked by people trying to get you to buy stuff. Right? It's not an exaggeration. Right? It might be stuff that's good for you if you trust their incentives. Right? Right? So there's a funny thing here where the satisfaction you're getting from scrolling down can itself become disgusting. Right? So the very thing that is drawing you can become bad. Right? But notice again that this is not a matter of trying to convince yourself not to do Facebook. It is trying to reframe things so that your explicit models make sense to your emotional intuitive space. Okay? But in the end, you have to be okay with either. Either that you end up not caring about Facebook anymore, or you cease to be bothered by the fact that you spend time on Facebook. There are other things too, like you spend less time on Facebook. Like this one I think is like not irrelevant. Okay. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is give you a chance to jump in. I know I haven't really told you the principle. I'm hoping giving you 3 examples and walking you through it a bunch is good, and that you can just try it. So what I'd like you to try doing is thinking of some examples of cases where you notice there's internal friction, where you have shoulds, like, oh man, I really should do that, or I shouldn't be spending so much time on this, or whatever, anything like that. Feelings of sort of amorphous guilt, feelings of sort of like half-heartedly doing things, like, okay, I'll write this paper, right? If you have like those kinds of feelings, when like if it's aligned with your goals, you would have a fire to get it done. If it's not aligned with your goals, then why are you doing it? Right? There are very few worlds where it's actually a sensible strategic move to half-heartedly do something that eats your life while you resent it. Okay? So fantastic arena of examples, like there are a bunch of classes of things like that. Also things that you sometimes do, like maybe you sometimes floss your teeth, like, I don't know, like once a week or whatever, like when it comes up and you're staring at the floss thinking, God, it's been a while, and then you kind of do this and yeah, I should totally do this all the time, and then you sort of build up this sort of like guilt force until it makes you, yeah. If you know that it's a good thing, or you think it's a good thing, like I say no, like one part of you knows, but if you believe that it might be a good thing for you, but you find yourself not doing it as much as you would like to, that's another case of this sort of thing. You may be able to have guessed kind of a flavor based on the 3 examples that I gave. I want to give you about 30 seconds to think of some examples for yourself. Go. Okay, so here's what you're going to do. You're going to grab a partner, you're going to pick one person's thing to work on, and you're going to see if you can run through it. To give you a quick sketch of what the run through is, once you have a thing, you apply the good faith principle, right? You recognize, you take a moment and notice, either world is okay, either result is fine. The goal is to understand what's going on and to link up the systems. You assume that there is virtue in both the explicit idea of what is right or what is wrong and also your drive. You come up with some sort of list. You don't have to draw it. You don't have to write it all out. You just have to notice. List or notice either the benefits of the drawbacks of doing it, if it's something you think you should be doing, or the benefits of doing it if you think it's something that you shouldn't be doing. And then doing this kind of reframe. Okay, finding a reframe that clicks. The goal is not to compel yourself. The goal is to translate the truth into a form that makes sense to your gut, so to speak, so that these two are talking well to each other. Okay? Find a partner, go. Okay, cool. So, I know that was way too little time. Typically for that part, we give people something like half an hour. Right? So I don't expect that you've gotten to a point of satisfaction or having completed something. But like, to what extent do you feel like you got an ability to engage with something? You got your teeth started into something. Okay, awesome, great. So one last point I wanted to emphasize here. There is a fourth thing that you would need to do, which I'll just put this as recall. But there's a trick that you can do where you recognize that, all my examples are erased. That's okay, so in the push-ups example, there's a part that's important where now that I've gone through and I've done this reframe, and once I feel something click, I'm being vague about this, but after a while you can start to learn how to intuit when you've actually made this dialogue work in a way that connects to drive. Once that clicks, it can later just get forgotten. The same way that studying for an exam, if you never use that information, it can just kind of drift away. So in the same sense, you sort of have to practice that click, right? So in order to do that, that means that you need to remember, so in this case for the push-ups, I would need to remember when I'm doing the push-ups to fire off this reframe. That feeling of panting where I'm going, oh God, this is hard. Oh, right, that's because I'm making progress. So that as I am doing it, I am remembering why. So that rather than trying to use willpower to push through the thing, the moment I start to feel that friction, instead I can notice, oh wait, this is why I'm doing it, to align, so that I align all of my forces in the same direction. It's a pretty cool effect when you get a chance to play with it. So if later on you finish doing the example that you were playing with, or you play with another example, make sure that you're doing this fourth part where you're sort of remembering to build it into your life. So with that had to do with the structure of the inside. Like this had to do with applying the good faith principle to this part of your drive that was always betraying you, or sort of making it so that you keep doing the wrong thing. Noticing that, well, maybe it's not as wrong as you think. Maybe it has your vested intentions in mind. And it's just a little tricky at communicating, and maybe it's missing information, or maybe you are. Right, so that's good faith inside. So now we want to play with what happens when you move this outside. So with that, I'm going to pass this back to Duncan.
Thanks. In particular with the recall thing, I just want to add like my own little flavor there that like if you go through this whole process, like noticing friction with what you previously assumed was your right goal, and you like look inside the good parts and you look inside the aversive parts, you like see the whole picture. This like meditation that might take you like 10 or 20 or 30 minutes, and you're like working through it with a friend and all that, and you like get to this place where you feel an urge to take steps toward the goal, whether it's a new goal or the old goal, doesn't matter. There's a thing where like a week later, and you feel differently, like Val was saying, you don't want to make yourself feel that way again later. It's not like I'm forcing, like, no, push-ups are good, I decided this already. It's more about like having a little hook into what it felt like to be here, right? If you can sort of cache that image and cache that feeling. So in the moment where you realize you've lost it, you're not pushing through with effort, you're like re-becoming the person who like already knew this answer. Does that make sense? You're like stepping back into that frame of mind where it is easy and where it is good. This is why it's super important that we're actually looking at true things, because you don't want to like easily step back into a frame of mind where you believe the wrong thing. That's like not helpful. Okay. So when we do this process internally, we call it propagating urges. When we do this process externally, we call it double crux. And I want to take one last look at what's going on with like views of the universe. Yeah.
So one question is do people who use this technique often end up in high prestige jobs that they don't actually enjoy?
I would imagine not, but I also would like honestly tell you that I don't have data on that yet. Yeah.
This technique is not widely spread across a whole lot of people. Like we have about 700 alumni, and it's a little tricky to convey propagating urges as a skill. Lots of people understand it, but not as many people are skillful with applying it. So I don't know, maybe say 30% of those. So like not a large sample size, and most of them are under about 35. So there hasn't been a lot of time for them to develop a lot of prestige and power. But from what we've seen, the way that technique actually works in practice, you don't end up in the position of doing something you don't enjoy that is highly aligned with all of your goals. If it's highly aligned with all of your goals and it's connected in with your inner drive, that's part of what it means to enjoy what you're doing.
But what if people don't have a very clear alignment of idea of what their actual goals are? Like a lot of people need constant social validation, and it's the social validation that drives their goals without them realizing it.
This is where paying attention is like the most crucial like aspect of being, I wouldn't say like a good rationalist, but like being a good scientist, a good rationalist, somebody who's interested in like having good epistemics and seeing reality for what it really is. Like noticing things about yourself is extremely hard to do, and it takes practice. That's like not a satisfying answer, but that seems to be the real answer. And that's where doing the propagating urges thing, where like if you practice noticing the internal friction and then like looking at it and living with it and like learning to get data out of it, you do that over and over and over again each time that you feel friction, you can build up this skill of like getting a clearer handle on what your own motivations actually are. And again, understanding, like knowing what your own motivations actually are, fantastic. It's just like knowing all the levers, very important. So this is what's going on, I posit, when we have these two agents that disagree, whether they're like different parts of your psyche, whether they're like two different people. Is it like, I see this part of the universe, right? Like let's say maybe I'm metaphorically speaking, I'm like looking at a maze, and I think that I need to go here, and then down here, and then like this, and then if I go here, that'll like achieve my goals. And the part of my psyche that's resisting and saying like, no, you actually shouldn't be eating Netflix and watching ice cream, you should be like, in this like metaphorical maze, there's like a different part of my psyche that knows that there's like a wall here. And the friction is coming from a part of me that's like aware that I haven't rested in a long time. Or that's like aware that I need some hedonism. Or that's like aware that actually the project that I've been spending like the last year on is going to be harder than I think, and it's like not actually going to work, and it's not going to be fun. And like it's hard for this part of my brain to notice that, but this part of my brain did notice it, and that's where those red flags are coming from, right? I'm assuming that this part of my psyche has seen something. And if I can expand my viewpoint and like understand that, I'll have a clearer picture, and I'll like see the universe better and be able to make a smarter choice. Same thing is going on in double crux. Right? Oftentimes we have these arguments where we end up with like, person one is like, A, and person two is like, not A. And there's like not really much more to be said there. And it's like, well, A, really, for serious. And like, no, not A, obviously, you're dumb, evil, whatever, right? What happened is, like, there was the world, these are continents, they're in the right places, right? And we were both looking at the world, me and this other person, and then we processed it in our like black box of consciousness, based on like all of our previous experiences and beliefs. And what came out was A for this person, and when this person processed that stuff through their own black box of consciousness, what came out was not A. And in fact, the interesting thing here is not this. This is like dull and boring. There's not really much to learn here. We're just like smashing our conclusions together. What's interesting is what caused us to reach different conclusions, right? The model, the algorithm, the like processing that caused this person to look at the world and say A, and caused this person to look at the world and say not A. These two people see something different. And if there's somebody in the world who sees something different than what I see, that means that I have a chance to learn. I have a like productive chance to update and improve my beliefs and get more data, and again, voraciously devour data at every possible opportunity, know as much as you can, right? So instead of arguing about conclusions, double crux, and we sometimes call it the double crux game because it's nice to be like relaxed and sort of curious and fun-seeking about it rather than deadly serious. The double crux game is about disambiguating this, about looking inside of it and seeing what it's made of, to get to the place where we both agree, not necessarily on conclusions, but we both agree on an if-then statement. If we can get to the point where we both agree that the same if-then statement, we have achieved victory. So how does this work? I have a belief, we'll call it A, and the other person has a belief that A is false, right? I also have a belief, B, that informs A. B is the reason I believe A. If it turned out that B was false, it would also be that A was false. With me so far? So for me, B is like the crux of the issue. It's like the important piece, the chunk that matters. And it just so happens that this person also disagrees with me about B. Right? And for them, their disagreement about B also informs their disagreement about A. If B were to turn out to be false, I would cease believing in A. If B were to turn out to be true, they would switch their belief to believe that A is true. It's a crux of the issue for me, and it is also a crux of the issue for them. Does this conceptually make sense? So one of the classic examples that was pretty straightforward, Kenzie and Critch were disagreeing about whether or not CFAR should like spend time fundraising versus spending like time and attention on improving curriculum. And it doesn't have to be a black or white disagreement, right? Like Kenzie thought it was 80% likely that we should spend our time fundraising, and Critch thought it was like 60% likely that we should spend our time fundraising. But this is still an interesting, what is it that Critch sees that Kenzie doesn't? And what is it that Kenzie sees that Critch doesn't? And they started talking about the beliefs that inform those core beliefs. How much funding matters, how broken the current curriculum was, and like how much we needed to test out new material and so on and so forth. And they got to a place where they agreed that if it turned out that the summer program required like X many dollars, then like they should spend time fundraising, right? Now this is still an open question, right? Like how much will it actually cost to run that summer program? But for this round of the double crux game, they were in agreement. If it turned out that it was going to be that expensive, then they would both agree that fundraising was important. If it turned out that it was going to be less expensive than that, it would turn out that fundraising was not important. And they found a place to like come together. Quick question?
Could curriculum development be something that approaches more of a global optimum, whereas fundraising tempts people to reach local optima?
Absolutely, and this is the sort of thing that you bring up when you're doing double crux, right? You try to find the things that like inform all of it, and you want to bring all of your model to the table. What we're really doing here is we're trying to collide models. We're trying to arrive at the place where you and the other person have the same model of how the world works, right? And let's say like B was that issue of how much money does the summer program cost? Maybe you do another round of double crux, right? Maybe they disagree about that too, and we're looking for a C and a D. These are knots, right? And all the way down to like Q and not Q. And in theory, if you like get to something that you can check, you can Google, and it will like cascade all the way back up to the chain, right? Turns out that we agree on whether it's Q or not Q, which turns out that we agree on P and D and all the way back up, right? And sometimes in this process of it like cascading backwards, you realize, like, I thought that that would change my mind, and now I see that it's like what you thought it was, and like, it is actually not C instead of C, and I noticed that like my core belief didn't shift. And I'm like, this is also interesting, right? This is progress. But this is much more interesting at every step of the process than just the two of us shouting at each other. Because like A, clearly, but not A. In this sense, instead of it being like a thing that is inside of me, right? We often think that our conclusions, we often find ourselves identifying with our conclusions, right? But in fact, the thing that I want to be identifying with is my model and like how good I think that model is. A has nothing to do with like me and my beliefs and the way that I see the world. But there's like a machinery going on that does have to do with me and my beliefs and the way I see the world. And I want that machinery to be good. I want that machinery to be machinery that produces true outputs. So instead of fighting back and forth over this output, which is like not the thing that I'm going to get you to agree on, we like productively like set the issue aside, and instead of me and Val fighting, it's like me and Val both being like, like you see a tail and I see a trunk, and we're like trying to see the elephant, right? Like what's the true thing? So it's kind of hard sometimes to like come up with a disagreement on the spot that is like non-trivial and productively double cruxable. Sometimes we joke about throwing out the like, make sure you write down a list of all 10 of your most controversial beliefs for the double crux session so you can like fight with people. But I do want to give you guys a chance to practice this a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say a thing that I think part of the room will like feel like they can defend. I'm going to say a thing that I think part of the room will disagree with, and we'll get people to like pair up. And the people who are outside of this, like this disagreement doesn't resonate with you, have a choice of either just sort of observing a pair as they try to find a double crux, or of like quickly, like, hey, like, I don't know, red state, blue state, whatever. And we're just gonna like try it, and it's insufficient, and there's like not enough time, which means that at the end of this lecture, when you like haven't had enough time to figure it all out, you should email us, or like come to CFAR workshops, or like go to less wrong meetups, or like come to more EA things, right? So let's say earn to give, direct action. Okay.
Mean that it's
What about
not
like
other
vegan,
people's-
vegetarian versus meat eating? Would that
This one gets fun. People who would argue passionately in favor of vegan, vegetarian,
Oh, perfect.
and people who would defend their right to eat meat. Cool. All right. So people who would defend their right to eat meat, keep your hands up. And remember, we're not actually looking for an answer to the question, right? We're looking to zero in on what the pivot points in this argument are. So it may boil down to a thing of like, well, like I would switch my belief if we could conclusively demonstrate this or this about animals' internal experiences, right? And we may not be able to figure that answer out, but if like you and the other person both agree on the if-then statement, like victory, you've succeeded, right? So people who defend their right to eat meat, raise your hands, and people who would argue passionately in favor of vegetarianism, find the people with their hands up. Hands up if you were like seeing interesting things, hearing interesting things. Hands down if like, nah, your opponent was just clearly wrong. It's important to note, like, you don't double crux other people. Right? Like this is not like a method for like going out and bashing other people into better beliefs, right? In fact, often you will find that the people who are truly passionate about their beliefs that you think are wrong are like not going to be receptive to you being like, so can you list like 3 things that would cause your belief to be false? So double crux can inform discussion even with like hostile partners, right? But then you have to remember that you're taking the burden onto your own shoulders of like staying civil and like staying disengaged and staying curious, disengaged from like theory and stuff, and staying curious about the world. Remember, it's all about finding the true belief, right? You're interested in learning the actual truth, even if that's counter to your current belief. And like double crux is hard, right? You have to like actually do some work to make this process function. This is like a thing that you can feel proud about doing because doing it takes effort. It takes like mature, responsible, like epistemic rigor, if that makes sense. This is like one of the reasons that people get frustrated with these debates, like religious debates, political debates. So you rarely hear the question like of like Trump supporters, like, so can you say like what would cause you to withdraw your support from Donald Trump? Like this is not a question people ask themselves. Or like 8 years ago, like, so Obama supporters, like what would cause you to cease supporting President or candidate Obama, right? But this is the sort of thinking that you want to do in your own head. We're looking for like the truth, which means we need to be willing to falsify like our current tentative beliefs. With that, pass it back over to Val.
So we've drawn up sort of outline. Yes.
I have a question about the terminology of the double crux. Is like the double crux the thing that like is pivotal for both people in their belief system?
Yeah. You imagine that I think A and you think not A, and it turns out I think A for reasons B, C, and D, and you think not A because of not D, E, and F, and then we're looking at this.
And that is the double crux.
This is the double crux.
And double cruxing as a verb is the process of finding the double crux.
Right. Yes, exactly. Okay. Also, you shouldn't latch too tightly onto any of CFAR's terminology. Like we have some really interesting ones. We have a class that we converted from being negative visualization to mundanification. And it is in desperate gasping need of a new name. And this is a typical thing CFAR does. We sometimes will invent terrible names for things to make it sticky. And then it goes through several iterations. But the technique itself is much more interesting. So I've drawn up these outlines. Don't take these too algorithmically. Like the idea is not to memorize the steps. We're trying to gesture at something by having written these up. So you notice that for both of these, for both propagating urges and double crux, you start with the good faith principle. This is the good faith principle toward your drive, toward your natural inclination. This is the good faith principle towards the other person. Right? So there's an awful lot of symmetry between how these two work. Here you're noticing the plausible causes of the current drive. Here you're actually looking inside first. Right? But there's a symmetry here. You're checking to see what is the structure of what's going on, right? Here, reframing. You're reframing the causes of the drive in terms of why you think it's a good idea anyway, consciously. Here, you're doing something comparable. You're sort of comparing your explicit models of what is key to your belief to what your partner thinks is key to their belief. You're sort of getting these two processes to dialogue. At that point, it forks a little bit. This is trying to make sure that you're integrating the belief structure, and at this point, you're celebrating because that's a game, and this works better because there are social dynamics. But I want to point out that the essence of this process is basically the same. Okay? It's just a matter of whether it's directed internally toward, let me move toward truth efficiently, versus externally, let us move toward truth efficiently together. The whole point is this spirit shift, this intention shift. One other note, in terms of the if-then statement, it actually should be an if-then statement, right? So like in order to identify a double crux, this is something like you'd believe this, if that, like if and only if, so that it can go both ways. If you don't know what that means, that's okay, but if you know the logical distinction between if and only if versus just if, then that's what's going on there. Okay, so with all of this, one of the sort of the main spirit that we were hoping that you take from this is this idea that it is possible to link up a desire for truth, a desire to see the world clearly, to understand what is in fact going on, with a sort of movement, a sort of internal force, a sort of thing that can happen, either within ourselves by linking up our explicit models and our intuitive drive, or between each other so that we can move together effectively rather than just bashing our heads together. Now, one of the foundational methods for doing this is to respect both of these using good faith principle.
Which is statistical in nature. You should do it even when it's going to be wrong. Until you have other evidence. Like once you've drawn a yellow Skittle out of the bag, feel free to call it yellow.
But do be cautious about that, because what it feels like for you to have a confident wrong belief is that everyone around you is an idiot. Right? So, be careful when calling other people yellow. Okay.
Or like in particular, if you think you have conclusive evidence that someone is not acting in good faith, give them one more shot, one more honest shot, because if literally everybody in the world operated on that principle, then we would be much better at understanding the truths that each other have to present.
Yeah. So I want to close the formal part and open this up for query and discussion.